What's up, guys? Better off dead. Back again. I'm Toad. NFL Week 5. Let's do it. And first, we can talk about last week. Second week in a row, I believe I went 2-1 with the NFL plays, which is fine. It's a win. It's decent. It's not bad. But the both weeks I was 2-0 and then lost the third game. This week it was the Giants not even showing up really on Monday night. I thought it was a good spot, extra rest. Thanks a lot, Giants. Thanks for not showing up whatsoever and having absolutely no offense whatsoever. No offense. Well, I am offended by that performance. But I did win the other two. The Bills were a nice, easy win against the Dolphins, who were overhyped after they put up that 70 spot. That was a nice win there, and I will be talking about the Bills shortly. I'm projecting what I might be talking about for this week's games. And we had the Jets with a nice cover there, the plus 9.5. It got a little dicey there near the end with some biased reffing, if I might say so. And I don't think I'm just saying that because I'm not really a fan of the Chiefs, not a fan of the whole Taylor Swift thing, not a fan of Travis Kelce and shilling for Big Pharma and his Taylor Swift relationship and all that stuff. I don't like any of that stuff. The Jets had a nice second half. Zach Wilson actually looked pretty good, played pretty well. They actually came together, like I said, I thought they might. And it was 2020 with almost no time left. And I think the Chiefs got the field goal, which wound up being the winning field goal. But then the Chiefs had the ball and threw what looked like it was going to be another interception thrown by Mahomes, and a late flag was thrown. I think it was defensive holding. The refs, I really think that it was the biased reffing, and I think they just saw that it was a Mahomes interception, and they just said, now we're going to flag this, and didn't look like holding. I don't think it was the right call. I didn't like it, and that had a chance to ruin the play, even though it was a 20-20 game with almost no time left. You don't cover the plus 9.5 at that point. Oh, man, that would be kind of brutal. That would be really brutal, really. But luckily, the Chiefs wound up still being able to run out the clock there, and I think there was a Jets penalty right at the end to run out the rest of the clock. So thankfully, that did wind up still coming through. The Jets plus 9.5. Let's get into this week's games here, and we're going to talk about this horrible, ugly Thursday night game first. Not only am I going to actually talk about it, but I actually have a bet on this one this time. And these Thursday night games, man, these are horrific, ugly games, but I actually like the spot here, or better, the better way of putting it would be that I don't like the spot for Washington here. Because I'm taking Chicago +6. As bad as that looks, as ugly as it is, the Chicago Bears look like one of the worst teams in football, man. And you can see here, we do have 67% of the tickets, but 72% of the money on Washington, and the line has gone up a little bit. But I think this is over like the last week or so, even possibly including before last week's games were played. I think this is going to straighten out a little bit. I don't buy these numbers really. I'm fairly confident in my situational read here that I think those will like balance out. But I like the Bears here. What we saw from the Bears, as I was just alluding to, I mean, the Bears are obviously going to be undervalued because they're 0-4 and have just looked awful. Their defense has been horrific. They've been giving up tons of points all over the place. And what did they do last week? The last time everybody saw them, looked like they were going to get their first win at home. They were up 28-7, I believe, late in the third quarter, I think, against the Denver Broncos. And what did they do? They wound up blowing the entire thing, blowing it all, and losing by 3 right at the end. Absolutely brutal. Bears can't get a win, man. And everybody saw that the Denver Broncos have been awful. Their defense has been maybe the worst in the NFL this year, and they had just allowed that Miami Dolphins 70-point outburst the week before that. So nobody likes Denver, of course. So people are going to think that Bears loss was really bad, really ugly. But I think that was kind of an embarrassing loss for the Bears, and I think that is going to focus them here. And I think the fact that they're still on the road and they don't have to face like their home, or actually they were at home in that game, so they get to get out of home, which is actually even better. And they get to go on the road. They get to get out of there. They don't have to hear, what the home fans are saying, whatever. They can ignore all that. They can go on the road. They can focus on football, even though it is a short week. Washington, on the other hand, what did they do? They looked pretty good, and they took the Philadelphia Eagles, who were in the Super Bowl last year, and I believe they're undefeated this year still, right? I think they are. Washington took them into overtime and were almost able to win for the second straight year, I believe, in Philly. They almost won again. Now I think that's going to put Washington in a letdown spot, man. They almost beat the Philadelphia Eagles, and if they had beaten the Philadelphia Eagles, I think they would have been tied with them, I think, at 3-1 atop the division. And instead, now they're 2-2, and the Eagles are 4-0. That's a pretty brutal loss. You come that close to tying them for the division lead, and instead you fall to 2 games back of them, plus down in the tiebreaker. That is going to be a tough loss to swallow. You were that close to doing it in overtime. Quick turnaround time, even though the quick turnaround time tends to help the home team a bit. I don't think that's the case here. I think Washington's in a bad spot because of that, and that is about it. And the Bears are coming off that embarrassing loss, and yeah, man, I like the Chicago Bears here, as I said, of course. I don't think Washington has anything upcoming, but yeah, Chicago Bears +6 are going to be the play in that one. Then we're going to look to Sunday, and we're going to look at another horrific, typically ugly type of game, the NFL Europe game, the London game, which I hate these London games, man. They're at like 6 a.m. Pacific time. Of course, I'm on the East Coast, so it's 9 a.m. my time, but it's still like I want to sleep in. I got to get up and like make sure that, I have my picks in and my bets and whatever and fantasy and everything straightened out by like 9 in the morning. Like, give me a fucking break, man. It's NFL Europe. I hate it. The only time I don't necessarily hate it, though, is when it's going to give me a spot that I like to look at here. And this is a spot that I think this is one of the strangest spots that I've ever seen. I've never actually seen anything quite like this in NFL history, I don't think. I'm playing the Jacksonville Jaguars here, plus 5.5 is what it is right now. Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention, I should have mentioned Bears-Washington. Before the season started, the Bears and Washington, that line was like Washington -1 in that game, -1.5. And after 4 weeks of football, they're now a 6-point favorite just because of what people have seen over the first 4 weeks or whatever. I don't think Washington is that much better than what they thought, than what we thought they were going to be. The Bears, I think, are about as terrible as we thought they were going to be. That's just, all the value has got to be on the Bears there. I think it's an overreaction of what we've seen. Back to this NFL Europe game, though, NFL London game. I don't think I've ever seen a situation like this before, ever. This is a situation where the Jaguars, they were in London last week. They played in London last week, and of course they won, and people saw the game. They looked good. So, I would tend to maybe not want to look at a team that did look good the last week, but everything else about the situation puts me right on Jacksonville here. They were in London last week, and they play a second straight game in London, which I think this is the first time. You can check me on this. I think this is the first time this has ever happened in NFL history. That is a huge advantage for Jacksonville. They've already been out in London for a week, so they're already well adjusted to the time zone difference out there. They have that extra week out there. They're also a team that's used to playing in London because they play there like every year pretty much, and I think they're kind of considered to be like the London NFL team, sort of. London's team, semi-home team. Their American team that's away from home, or their London team that's away from home, kind of. The British-American Jacksonville Jaguars. But yeah, I think the fact that they're familiar with playing in London, and this time they've already been out there for a week, that is a massive advantage for the Jaguars, and they're getting 5.5 points here. And what did we see the Bills do? Well, I just kind of referred to it. I was on the Bills last week. The Bills had a huge win in a game that they really needed to win so that they could continue being sort of the top team in the AFC East there, because they would have fallen to 2 games behind the Dolphins if they lost that game. And also losing the tiebreaker, kind of similar to the situation that Washington is in now, except that Philly is, of course, better than Washington. But the Bills, they're still the best team in the AFC East. So that was a huge win. That was kind of the early battle for AFC East supremacy there. Bills are coming off that huge win now over the Dolphins, who were getting all that hype coming into that game. The Bills looked great, dominated them. I think they won 48-20 or something like that. And now they have to go not only on the road, but out to London to face a Jags team that, like I said, is used to playing out there and has just been sitting out there waiting for them. The Bills are going to have to spend the week adjusting to the time zone difference. I don't know exactly when the Bills are going to be getting over there, if they have already gone over there, but the Jaguars have all that extra time in that new time zone. They've already adjusted to it. I think this is, really not a good spot for the Bills, and it is a good spot for Jacksonville. Although we do see here that 80% of the tickets and 86% of the cash look like they're on the Bills right now. Kind of similar to what I said with Washington. I'm not quite buying those numbers. It's kind of earlier right now. I actually think that this might kind of flip places as well, and you'll wind up seeing that the cash discrepancy is more on the Jacksonville side, because I think everything about the situation dictates that Jacksonville would be the play here, and that is going to be what it is for me there. Jacksonville plus 5.5. And finally, the Atlanta Falcons minus 1.5. And by the way, I think Jacksonville, that line I think was minus 3.5 for Buffalo, like before the season started or something like that. Although Buffalo is the slightly better team, I would say, but the situation just, I think, dictates that line is a little bit too high. Anyway, Atlanta. So my 3 plays are actually going to be the first 3 on the board, which is kind of a rarity, I guess. But the Atlanta Falcons, and you can see here again, it looks like the Texans have 73% of the tickets, but 76% of the cash. So again, kind of have that cash discrepancy on them. But again, I'm going to say I'm not quite buying it, even though you've seen the number go down. I think this early number was actually the early one from last week as well. Falcons are down to minus 1.5. And I think the 3.5, this is part of the reason why I like the Falcons here, is the Falcons were minus 3.5 with like the look ahead line, like before what we saw last week. And I think maybe even before the season started, it might have also been around that number. But what I like about this is that the Atlanta Falcons, and I think that money discrepancy is going to switch again. I think the smarter money is going to be on the Atlanta Falcons. You can see they're actually they've gone up towards 2 now. And I think it was like a pick 'em at one point. I laid the 1.5 with them. If you're laying anything for them, kind of just win the game. I think that's fine. You could lay maybe a small money line price on them to win the game too. I think that's fine. What we have going on here is, and this is the other side of that Jacksonville game, NFL Europe London game last week against Jacksonville, where Atlanta looked pretty much as bad as you could look. They had to go out to London, but remember, they were facing a Jacksonville team that's familiar with those digs out there in London. Atlanta's not really as familiar with it, so that was kind of a worse spot for Atlanta there, kind of a weird spot for them to go out there. They didn't look good at all. They only put up 7 points. I think they've lost 2 in a row. Ritter doesn't look good. Now they're coming back. They're back at home, and I think when a team comes back from London, I think they also tend to be a little bit undervalued now, because the recreational bettors and such, they're going to look at it and say, this team just had to travel back from London. They were just in London last week. This has to be a bad travel spot for them, right? But it seems like that tends to kind of not be the case anymore. It seems like that team actually has some value, because people over value how much of an effect they think that's going to have, the return from London there. And I think within the last few years and stuff, I think you saw a lot of those teams would wind up getting the bye in the week after the London game. And I think it might have been optional, where teams could say, no, we will choose to not take the bye that week, and we'll actually choose to have to play a game. And usually when teams did that, they actually played pretty well in that game when they decided to push off the bye and actually play that week coming back from London. So I'm not really concerned by the travel for Atlanta having to come back from London. They looked bad in London. I believe they've lost 2 in a row now, because they lost to Detroit before that. So that early season where they hype, or whatever you want to call it, where they looked kind of good and were, I believe, 2-0 out of the gate, that's kind of gone now. Now you've got kind of an undervalued Atlanta team. But what do you have on the other side here? The Houston Texans, they are overvalued, man. They're about as overvalued as I think you can get. And of course, this isn't loading on me right now, so that's great. Houston, what did they do last week? Last 2 weeks, really, they demolished the Jacksonville Jaguars on the road by 20 points. Big upset win, looks really good. And then they came home and they really stuck it to the Steelers. And I mentioned that game last week because I thought Houston was kind of in a bad spot coming off demolishing the Jaguars, but I thought the Steelers are in an even worse spot because the Steelers are in like an AFC North sandwich kind of there where they have, I know the Steelers have the Ravens, or no, not an AFC North sandwich, but the Steelers have the Ravens coming up this week, which was a big, like, kind of look-ahead spot. But the prior week, they'd gone out to Las Vegas and had almost like a home crowd out there and had won that game in pretty big fashion, won that game pretty easily. So that's the situation the Steelers were in there. So they weren't in that great of a spot. So I don't think it was that shocking that the Steelers played like a really bad game. I think we have to slow it down on the Houston Texans here. I don't see a reason why the Houston Texans should be like nearly a pick 'em at Atlanta. Like this line is now saying that the Houston Texans are actually the better team against the Atlanta Falcons. I really don't see that being the case. Everybody loves C.J. Stroud right now, what they've seen out of Houston the last 2 weeks. But prior to those 2 weeks, everybody was talking about Houston like they were one of the worst teams in the NFL. So, like, which one is it? There's a lot of recency bias going into this. I think you got to slow it down, hold your horses here. I think Atlanta is actually the slightly better team here, and I think really Atlanta should be, like, somewhere around, like, a 3 to 4 point favorite here. I think would be, like, a fair line, like, based on how good or not good these two teams are. And, yeah, I don't think either team is really that good. But those are my feelings on those. I like Atlanta, minus the 1.5. I think we've gotten a little too far with the Houston Texans hype here to the point where they're too overvalued. And let's see if I have any other leans here that I might be able to talk about here where it's not a whole lot that I like to see, that I like to look for here. Cowboys 49ers is the big game, but like I kind of talked about with the Red River rivalry, I just mentioned it briefly in the other video that I did for college with OU against Texas. It's a hard one to predict, man. Cowboys 49ers is the big matchup of the week. I don't know what to think about that one, really. I would probably lean to the Denver Broncos slightly because the Jets have a little bit of the shorter week because they come off the Sunday night game. They actually looked good, and they played the Chiefs really close and were in that game and they could have won that game. So the Jets might be in a little bit of a letdown spot, whereas the Broncos, I think, are kind of in a more positive spot where they got off the schneid kind of and finally were able to get that first win and at least kind of silence critics to some extent for now and looked good, at least in mounting that comeback there. So I think I would lean to the Broncos in that one, and the Jets have to travel out into elevation. So I think the Broncos have a little bit of value there, and I don't think that this opening line, again, I don't think it's like accurate. I don't think the cash and ticket discrepancy is actually an accurate representation of what's going on there either. I think the Broncos actually might have been an underdog at one point here and have kind of moved to the favorite. So I think the money is kind of moving that way. So there is that, and then Sunday night, I don't really know if I have any much of an angle on that at all. And then the Monday night game is a weird game because it looks like 53% of the tickets with 73% of the cash on the Raiders. I don't know that the line has actually moved to the Packers because of any of the actual like market action that's going on. I think it seems to me like there are a lot of professional bettors who actually like the Raiders here, and I just don't know why. And I think the numbers moved, I think, because of the Raiders quarterback situation. I don't think it's because of one team being necessarily like overvalued or undervalued for some other reason. I think it's because the Raiders don't know who their quarterback is going to be. But like Jimmy G, I believe, came out of the game last week, and they put in Aiden O'Connell, the Purdue grad, who's a rookie now, and he was good at Purdue, but he was making a lot of mistakes, didn't really quite look ready last week for the Raiders. And I don't think he's that good, at least not yet. Even though he was good in college, I don't like Jimmy G either. I don't trust Jimmy G as an NFL quarterback at all. I don't think either of them are good. They have Brian Hoyer on the roster too, and I'm surprised they didn't use him last week as the backup because he is the one with the NFL experience at least, but maybe they just want to usher in the O'Connell era and see what he can do. I don't know, even though that was a big game against the Chargers. But I'm going to disagree with the Raiders here just because that quarterback situation, I don't like it. I don't really like any of those quarterbacks. I don't like Jimmy G. I think if Jimmy G comes back, we're going to see the Raiders shift to the favorite here, and then I think you might actually want to bet the Packers if you see the Raiders become a favorite because Jimmy G comes back. I think there's going to be value on the Packers. I don't see any real reason to like the Raiders here. The Raiders are kind of in a rough spot because they come off that game against the Chargers, a big division game where they got back into the game after they were losing by multiple scores and cut it to 7, and they had chances at the end. They had possession of the ball. They got into scoring range. I think they were in the red zone, like near the end. And I think that the Chargers kind of got away with a couple of offensive pass interference calls late in the game when they had the ball there that kind of sealed the game and kind of sealed the Raiders' fate there. And I think that's a big game and kind of a tough loss for the Raiders there because they were in that game and had chances to beat their division rival, the Chargers, and pull off that upset. So I don't know that they're in a very good spot after that at all. And the Packers looked really bad the last time we saw them. So I don't see how they couldn't be a bit like undervalued after what we saw last Thursday. The Packers were at home and they just got wrecked by the Detroit Lions. They didn't look good at all. And they have extra time off to prepare for this game, and they get to get out of there, out of their home city, and go on the road, which can kind of lend itself to more focus on the game itself. So I would actually lean to the Packers in that game. But I think that's going to do it for what I think of these NFL games here this week. The actual plays, the Thursday night game, Chicago Bears +6. Seriously ugly in that one. The NFL London game with Jacksonville Jaguars getting to have an entire extra week out there, being already adjusted to it against the Bills, who I think are in letdown mode. I really like the Jaguars +5.5, and then Atlanta -1.5. I think this is let's slow it down a little bit on the Houston Texans. I think the Houston Texans are not a very good team still. I think they're overvalued. And in addition to that, I'll point out that the Texans, they have a lot of offensive line problems right now. Their offensive line is kind of in shambles. I think they have some more injuries going on there. I don't get it. I don't get what's going on with that number there. Atlanta -1.5 being that last play. And I think that's going to do it. I am Toad. Tower Gang Toad. You can find me, Tower Gang Toad, on Twitter. You can find me on the Tower Gang Podcast, the most offensive podcast in the world. We're on Rumble, Odyssey, YouTube for now. We put our episodes up on Spotify after the fact. And you can subscribe to our locals and send us some cool cash. Awesome. TowerGang.locals.com. That's going to do it. I'm Tower Gang Toad, better off dead. I can't believe it's 4 in the morning. I don't even know how I'm alive right now. But if I seem like I'm out of it, it's because I totally am, and I shouldn't even be doing these podcasts in this state. So forgive me. Better off dead. I definitely am. Peace out.